Yet another author that contributed to the Growing Hope magazine was Michael Heasman. Along with his colleague Tim Lang, Michael co-authored the well-known book Food Wars, and they both collaborated on the article found in the Growing Hope magazine titled Plotting the Future of Food. I spoke with Michael over the phone from his office in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he explains how the innovations that led to Canada's global agricultural prominence over the past 100 years are now the very factors serving to crumble this foundation and endanger its future success.
I think first of all we must sort of emphasize the success of Canadian agriculture and its agribusiness in terms of becoming a world leader in producing sort of commodities and its position in the world in terms of its food supply. But this sort of agricultural base was built upon assumptions that were really set down 50, 60 years ago, in particular inputs of cheap energy based on oil, a sort of production method built around monoculture and high chemical inputs, and also reliance on large inputs of water as well, which is becoming a key issue. And all of these areas of environmental impact in terms of energy, water, monoculture, chemical input is becoming sort of increasingly problematic in sustaining this type of agricultural practice. And so many people around the world are now questioning whether this type of production method, and which has been so successful in the past, will be able to continue for the future.
In their article, both Michael Heasman and Tim Lang suggest that food policy can be understood as the tension between three competing models, the dominant one being, as they call it, the productionist paradigm, a model based on transportation, chemicals, and industrialization. And Michael helps unravel the consequences of such a model.
I think the consequence of the productionist paradigm, as I call it, with this input of cheap energy, sort of monoculture, is there's been some really sort of big downsides, and particularly I think if you look at terms of corporate concentration, which has profound impacts for the competitiveness of the food sector, and also in terms of it also impacts the ability of the sector to innovate. And we've seen increasing concentration around the corporate sector, which has seen tens of thousands of Canadian farmers go out of business. And also we have a position today where a small elite of farmers actually make the money, while the majority of small farmers and rural communities in Canada have to rely on income outside the farm to actually make a living and be able to continue farming. And so it's not a good prospect for the future of the rural economy for Canadians.
Yet another model that competes with this productionist one is what is referred to as an ecologically integrated model, one of which the Growing Hope project hopes to suggest when drafting their policy document to be presented in 2008.
I think when I talk about the ecological modernization of society and apply that to food and agriculture, I'm trying to put in place a way of looking at the future of food that takes a long-term perspective rather than a short-term perspective. And by long-term, I'm thinking of a generation ahead, so 25 to 30 years. And I think what we're seeing increasing pressures on our food system, in particular, whether it be the water use, soil erosion, the monoculture and lack of biodiversity, the fact that the inputs into agriculture, their reliance on oil in particular, can get increasingly problematic and expensive. We can just see a whole system potentially unraveling and hitting a major crisis. And so what I'm suggesting by an ecological modernization is that Canada should take a wider and broader view through its agricultural policy framework review so that it can be proactive rather than reactive as crises hit the food system. And I think this will involve some very difficult decision-making, some very creative policy and problem-solving. And I don't think there is one answer. I think one of the problems of the current food system is its sameness. There's this assumption that one size fits all. And really the whole lessons from biology and biological systems is diversity, variety, and a celebration of differences. And it would be interesting to see if we can work out creative and sustainable solutions to food supply that take into account of the diversity of food and our food needs and our food culture, not just concentration on narrow fiscal goals.
As I neared the end of my conversation with Michael Heasman, I questioned the ecological modernization that is currently leading to great changes within our food supply, and that is the widespread adoption of organic methods of farming. And while such a large-scale shift is seen to be a positive one, Michael sees ecological modernization as being more than just organic inputs, but a model that addresses food right from growing it through to consuming it.
Well, I think there's a number of key points to ecological modernization. There is an assumption that just means everything turning organic, and I do not think that is necessarily a solution. I think it's a lot wider than that. By ecological modernization, it's not just the production methods, although organics is very welcome in terms of, even at an industrial scale, that it actually reduces the chemical inputs. It treats soil as a living matter rather than something to be chemically controlled. I mean, there's a number of things which I'm wholly supportive of. But I view food as a lot more wider than just agriculture. I see food in terms of a food system, from growing the food, its inputs, right through to our consumption experience. So I look at food in terms of its social, its cultural roots, the way in which that food, in a sense, is just so essential to our survival. So therefore I see it as a common good, that there is a human right to food, and that we also have a relationship with nature and the environment through food, which is different from other industrial sectors. And so I feel that we need to think creatively and innovatively in ways that we can embrace this wider understanding of food. And I think you see this in some of the dichotomies in Over the Future Food. You see particularly an important dynamic is the relationship between local food systems and global food systems, the local and the global, and how to reconcile those. And I think one really important and overlooked policy area for Canada is to work more on developing a local food system, domestic food supply, and getting back to celebrating the diversity of what Canada can grow. And also looking at things like seasonal and regional differences and celebrating those and developing those and growing those.